This project and exhibition is the first of 5 exhibitions that are part of a series called the Ignorant Art School, 5 sit-ins towards creative emancipation. And it was really the sort of starting point in thinking about what form the work would take. And with lockdown and with the exhibition being delayed and having all this long online events, things, it enabled a much longer kind of process and an opportunity to make more new work that really drew on the ideas behind the Ignorant Art School as sort of starting point, really, in thinking about the sort of overlaps and overlapping interests that Sophia and I have in like knowledge production and creative voices, creative activist voices. The title of the exhibition is "We Could Have Been Anything We Wanted to Be, and It's Not Too Late to Change." And that's a couple of lines from a song, "You Give a Little Love," that's from the famous film Bugsy Malone, which is a film I kind of grew up with. And I have used the first part of the title for our work before. "We Could Have Been Anything We Wanted to Be" is a work that features in the exhibition. And it was actually that work that was the starting point, where Sophia, the curator, and I spoke about there being one work that was central to the ideas behind the exhibition, and that work is a decimal clock. It's an analog clock, and it was originally commissioned in 2011 for the Folkestone Triennial, and it's a time system that was actually in use for 2.5 years in France following the revolution, and it's a completely different way of organising the day into, rather than the 24-hour system, which we're all very familiar with, obviously. It takes the day and it divides it into 10 and makes it a rational system. And at that point in history, a lot of things like weights and measures were decimalised, and they carried through into our daily lives, but time, the experiment of decimal time, did not carry through. An hour of decimal time is much longer. It's an equivalent to over 2.5 hours of our time. Each hour contains 100 decimal minutes, and each minute contains 100 seconds. The clock itself is installed outside the gallery on the facade of the building, so it's really a sort of public artwork. As you come into the gallery, there's a new piece of work, and this is where the extended title comes from, and it's called "It's Not Too Late to Change," and it's a perpetual calendar, and it uses the format connected to the decimal clock. It uses the format of the French Republican calendar. So as well as dismantling the system of time, they also dismantled the Gregorian calendar as we know it, and destroyed all religious symbols, all powerful symbols. And it was an attempt to make time itself secular. And the year was restructured into 12 months. Those months were renamed with very beautiful names that were decided on by a committee that included artists, poets, as well as horticulturalists. And the names of the months reflect the sort of season that they were in, and they reflected nature. So they decided to use the system of nature to draw their symbolism from nature, because they saw nature as something that was transhistoric, that the names of the months were fusions of words from French, but also from ancient Greek. So you have names like Nivos, which is around our December time, which is of the snow. You have Brumiere, which is of the fog. You have the month we're in now, which is Fructidor, which is of the fruit, which makes complete sense when you think about harvest time and how we experience the natural world around us at this moment. But then there were also the days of the week were organised, so the week became 10 days long. The first day of the week was called Primidi, and that always fell on the first of the month, and that went through to the end of the week on Decadi. But it failed because it was actually creating a worse deal for the workers in many regards. The structure itself was, because the week was longer. There were more working days. That's one of the reasons that they shifted back to the old system, but also Napoleon abolished the system, and it was also to do with the standardisation of the railways across Europe and industrialisation starting to happen. We thought that it was particularly pertinent to show the decimal clock here in Dundee, because Dundee itself has a really interesting radical history, and part of that was its relationship with the French Revolution. And there was a very strong Friends of the People organisation here in Dundee, which was a group of men who supported the revolution and its principles. And they had planted, there's a brilliant story I think it's recorded in a local newspaper, and it describes a group of men getting together and showing their sympathies for the revolution by planting what was known as a liberty tree in support. And I think they planted it in the centre of town, and then it was moved, and the provost, or the equivalent councillor at the time, actually imprisoned the tree, and it's the only known instance of a plant ever going to prison. So he locked it up overnight, and then it was released again. Or I think they planted a new tree, so it kept on coming. This tree was ever present, and it's actually now in the grounds of the art school here in Dundee, and just around the corner from where the clock is located, there's a new tree of liberty. And then I made a work for the stairwell here, which is quite a dark space. So I wanted to create something that was illuminated, and it takes the form of a light box, and on the box, so it's the shape of a speech bubble, and that work's called Heckle, and it's a kind of nod back to a show that I made 10 years ago in Dundee called Brank and Heckle, and I'm still interested in this idea of the heckle as something that's a sort of spontaneous interjection and sort of vocalisation of often sort of political interjection. And it's a word that's said to have come from Dundee, from the jute mills here. And so that was very present in my mind when I was thinking about work for the show, and thought I'd actually make it into the shape of a speech bubble. To me, I was looking at what kind of shape that would be, and I started looking at Leo Baxendale's style of drawing for the original Bash Street Kids, which was actually called When the Bell Rings. And so the form of the lightbox itself is kind of Leo Baxendale-ish, and the text within it is taken from a magazine called Blackboard, which was an anarchist magazine produced in the 70s that we actually used to publicise the exhibition. We used a cartoon from the back of Blackboard. So on the front of it, it has a sort of bootleg Dennis the Menace, and he's saying that all over the world, schooling has an anti-educational effect on society. And then on the back, there's this deturned cartoon of the Bash Street Kids, which has a satirical drawing of the then Education Minister, Ted Heath, sort of telling the kids off, and other kids they're saying, like, seize the time and lassoing the clock. And it seemed like the perfect cartoon to accompany it. So the Bash Street Kids was in the back of my mind. And this phrase, no more boss class history, came from the magazine as well, where our pupils saying, we don't want no boss class history, we want working class history. And that seemed to sum up a lot of historical ideas that I'm drawn towards, are the voices of people who've challenged that sort of authoritative and sort of hierarchical notion of history, and also thinking about my own schooling in the context of an exhibition which is part of a series about education, really thinking about what type of history I was introduced to at school, and only really as an adult realising how problematic that was, and how it was really, the history of the powerful, and that you were taught about. And so I got really interested as someone in their 20s. I got really into reading about that idea of history from below, and looking at people like Raphael Samuel, and thing about how he said history ought to be a collective enterprise in which everyone is equally engaged. And there's a multitude and sort of pluralistic number of voices in that. And that's something that I felt was really summed up by this school pupil's voice about No More Bottom Class History. So the work in the main gallery, How Many Flowers Make the Spring, is an installation. And the installation consists of a lot of plant material, and that is presented alongside a 18-minute audio piece. I originally planned the installation to resemble a meadow, and then it's evolved into something else. I'm not quite sure whether to call it a garden or a meadow or a landscape. It's quite a wild, weedy meadow. It is mainly created from dried plant material that's been collected from a number of places and with the support of a number of different local organisations. So a lot of the material has been foraged for. Some of it has been grown, some of it has come from my garden, some of it has come from the car park here. And it's created with the help of a number of creative people, a florist, Flowers Vermilion, advised on how to create the installation. And then we had a lot of help from former students here and gallery staff as well. So it really has been a collaborative construction. There are some live plants in the installation, but only about 30 live plants that are interspersed within the dry material. And the voices of the 5 activists who've taken part in the interviews are located at 5 different points throughout the installation. And my original thinking was that where the voices appear, that is where there is more kind of subtle bits of live growth. So it's almost like their sort of desire and their sort of conviction has brought this to life. I really feel like I've responded to the form of the gallery. I really like making new work for particular settings rather than showing existing works. And so the process of making this new work has really been fed by this long research period that we had, and also all the events that we produced during lockdown. And those events were in collaboration with a lot of other people and people from Dundee. The first series in the series of events we made was called An A to Z of Dundonian Descent. And that was a really useful framework to bring in the knowledge that I already had of Dundee and of its unique kind of radical history, and then invite other people into that. And we used this framework of an alphabet to deliver these sort of historical anecdotes. A lot of them were seemingly disconnected, but then it painted this picture of a really energetic and amazingly rich, active, very strongly feminist history within the city. And that has been something that was almost like commissioning my own body of research that I could then respond to make the exhibition.
I could see the view and I could look out across the city I knew, and I could see the river and the sunset, and I had this realisation about the hugeness of it all and the smallness of myself. I remember being close to feeling like I was like a spanner in a machine, and wishing people could see how it all works.
I've seen film footage from the day, and the sound is just incredible. Hundreds of thousands of people chanting together.
It was the most extraordinary shifting moment I can remember. And I think from that point onwards, I knew that we could do it.
I kept thinking about it. I kept looking at photos and things, and I think it's just so... I think there's so much in our lives that tries to hide from us our power in that way.